TrekProfiles Podcast, Episode 6, recorded June 2018. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we talk with a Star Trek fan. We learn their story, and then we try to figure out why this show matters to them, to you, and to all of us Trek fans. I am John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, Episode 6. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. If you wish to leave us a voicemail, you can leave a message at our automated voicemail line at 609-512-LLAP. That's 609-512-5527. Warning! As we record this, we have reached the end of Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery. So all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, human. And my co-host on this episode is the electronic, duotronic, nanobioelectronic, and multifaceted M5.
M5 standing by.
Let's do the communications, M5.
Communications now available.
The Trek Profiles Podcast is a proud member of the Tricorder Transmissions Network. We have so many wonderful shows on the network. If you haven't heard the wonderful debate between Trek Ranks host Jim Morehouse and Politics host Barry DeFord on if Captain Jellicoe is a good captain or not, I'd highly recommend it. Check it out at www.thetricordertransmissions.com. If you enjoy this or any of the other shows and you wish to support the network, you may do so through Patreon. As we record this, we just completed our first Patreon supporters hangout, and it was a really fun time. We talked Trek and had a blast. We have the next one scheduled for Tuesday, July 17th at 9 Eastern, 6 Pacific. If you'd like to attend, check your emails from Patreon for details. The network is also planning a whole bunch of things for STLV this year. We're going to have swag, events, and a bunch of other stuff. Be sure to follow our Twitter account at Tricorder Show for details as it gets closer to STLV. Another way you could support this or any of our shows is to visit our show page in iTunes and give us a nice rating and review. And if you aren't an iTunes user, that's okay too. We'd appreciate your rating and review in whatever platform you use. Those reviews help other fans find us, and we appreciate them so very much. News for this week. I came home just the other day, and the M5 had announced, as usual, that he must survive, and then proceeded to tell me that he had upgraded himself. So enjoy the new and improved M5. I have one tweet I'd like to mention this week. I'd asked for any feedback on the show, and listener Jen, who goes by EatAtQuarks on the Twitter, suggested that I might ask guests about any special memories or special times that they'd had watching Trek. I thought that was a great suggestion, so I've added it to the prep material for the show. It doesn't mean that every guest will get asked that question, but in the prep part of the show, if they have a meaningful answer, I'll be sure to put it in. So thanks, Jen. Really appreciate the feedback. Okay, Kobayashi Maru time. I tweet out the questions from the Kobayashi Maru after each episode so all of you can have your say. These questions come from episode 4, which was the Bill Smith episode, so let's see what we got. Question 1. Time to unwind in the evening with a libation. Romulan ale or Klingon blood wine are both on offer. What's your choice? Bill Smith said blood wine, but in the poll, Romulan ale won 70-30. I guess if it's good enough for Kirk and McCoy, it's good enough for all of you. Question 2. Would you rather play a round of poker on the Enterprise D with our TNG friends, or perhaps some baseball with the DS9ers? Bill said poker, and most of you agreed with him, 52-48%. I guess I'll see all of you card players in the casino at the Rio at STLV. Question 3. Which of these two episodes do you believe is better? And the Children Shall Lead or Spock's Brain? Bill said Spock's Brain, and all of you said Brain and Brain. What is Brain? It is our favorite of the two by 74-26%. Those of you choosing And the Children Shall Lead need to give us your reasoning on that. Send us an email, feedback@trekprofiles.com, or on Twitter or Facebook. Question 4, time to choose your pain. Would you rather take your chances as a red shirt on a TOS landing party or be a Starfleet officer at the Battle of Wolf 359? Bill said that being a red shirt was for him, but all of you said he chose poorly. And officer at the Battle of Wolf 359 won 56 to 44%. Double bonus points if any of you get the reference. And question 5. Finally, which of these would make the more awkward dinner conversation in the officer's wardroom? Option 1, being turned into a giant transwarp slug that's going to end up having space slug babies with the captain. Option 2, being forced to rub NX-01 Enterprise-era decontamination gel all over your coworker's back knee every time y'all come back from the planet. Trek Geek Bill said the transwarp slug babies would be more awkward, and I think he captured the feelings of the listenership at 61 to 39%. So I guess the fandom doesn't mind the back knee so much. So there you go. Check my Twitter if you'd like to have your say on the Kobayashi Maru questions from this episode. That's going to do it for all the messages and feedback, so let's start the show. M5, roll it.
M5 acknowledged.
His favorite character is Odo. His favorite alien guest star is a toss-up between Weyoun and Gul Dukat. His favorite ship is the Defiant. I'm sensing a theme here, people. And he's currently rewatching Discovery Season 1. He is one half of the amazing Trek Geeks podcast. You can find him on the Twitter at TrekGeekDan. He is from the first in the nation primary state where they emblazon "Live Free or Die!" exclamation point on the license plates. It's Dan Davidson. Welcome, Dan, and thank you for being on my podcast.
Hey, John, thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. I've listened to every one of your episodes so far. I love it, and I'm really honored to be sitting here talking to you and all your listeners. It's pretty awesome.
Well, I'm jazzed. Now we're at 100% Trek Geek power here on Trek Profiles podcast, so I'm excited. But Dan, it's time for question 1. Are you a Star Trek fan?
I am a Star Trek fan to the infinite level. It is the very core of me and has been for a very long time. Absolutely, I am a Star Trek fan, John.
How long have you been a Star Trek fan?
Well, to age myself, I grew up in the 70s. I was born in 69. So when the reruns were showing on local Boston affiliate WLVI TV 56 when I was a youngster, not even in my 10, 11, 12 years old, probably younger than that, I started watching it. Whether I was a fan at that time is another discussion, but I've been watching it since the mid-70s at the least, I think.
So did you discover it on your own, or did someone turn you on to it, or a family member, a friend, or did you just find it all by yourself?
No, I wouldn't say I was turned on to it. I would say I was forced into it. It's really amazing to talk to other people about their fandom, and a lot of people became fans based on family members, and I'm no different. My brother was a big Star Trek fan. He's 5 years older than I am, so he would like to watch Star Trek every day, and being the oldest of the three, I was the youngest. When it came time for Star Trek was put on the TV. It was back in the day when we only had 10 or 12 channels, if that, to watch. And I wanted to watch the Brady Bunch or Gilligan's Island or something like that, but he was the older brother, so he got to watch Star Trek, so I was forced into watching it. So I would sit there and pout and watch this ridiculous show with a bunch of people with funny uniforms and monsters running around, and then finally it just started growing on me.
And does he still watch Star Trek, or have you overtaken him with your fandom?
Oh, I overtook him with my fandom decades ago, but he still does love it. We have great conversations about Trek all the time. He listens to Trek Geeks when he can, but I would say that his fandom dwarfs mine. But then again, my fandom is so off the charts that it's not a hard thing to say. I don't fault him for it at all, and I'm eternally thankful that he got me into it in the first place. So it all works out.
It's one thing to watch the show, even if you grew up watching it and watching all the episodes and having that appointment viewing, which was essential at the time because this is pre-DVR. And at some point you move into this phase where you really start to embrace the fandom in a bigger way, going to the conventions, doing cosplay, doing podcasts about it. What flipped that switch for you? How did you go from someone who just watched and appreciated the episodes into really infusing Star Trek in your life in such a big way?
That's actually a really good question. I once I started actually appreciating what I was watching. And as I got older, I think that's the key. Once I started getting older in my teenage years, which is, of course, that's still quite young, you start to appreciate things a little bit better. And I started watching them over and over again. I would watch the reruns and I would, learn the dialogue. And it just started to be something that I like to do more and more. And at that time, that was it. It was just TOS. There was nothing else. It was the animated series, but I wasn't really into that back then. It took me until I started podcasting to actually appreciate the animated series at all. But then the movies started coming out, and the first movie was announced. And I think that's really when things started to change for me. I can vividly remember there's a movie theater in Nashua, New Hampshire, or there used to be a movie theater. It was called the Brant, and it was on Main Street in Nashua. It was a rundown, terrible theater, but they somehow were able to get the Star Trek the Motion Picture to be shown in their theater instead of the General Cinema, which was the better known one in the city. So I can remember going to the premiere. I don't know if it was the first night or if it was the first weekend, but I just remember these huge, those giant spotlights that they shine in Vegas or in Disney, and they're just those huge, powerful spotlights.
I live in Vegas, man. Every house comes equipped with them.
Exactly. Well, they had two of them in front of the theater going back and forth, and the line went around the building and down the parking lot into the mall area called the Seminole Plaza. And I'm like, oh my God, this is really going to be something. And as much as people diss on the motion picture, that's when it really kicked into gear for me, because I absolutely loved it. I love it now even more than I did back then. And, more movies came out, TNG, DS9, all the way through. And as another one comes out, my fandom gets bigger and bigger with each one.
So for all the series, did you watch them all in first run as they happened, or did you miss some of them and come back to them later?
No, I've seen every series, every episode as they came out since TNG aired. Yeah, every one of them.
So you are a complete.
Oh yeah, absolutely complete. I've seen every single episode, every series, every movie. I may have missed an episode when it actually premiered, but I had VCRs at that point, so they would be taped. So I'd never missed any of the series from the original get-go from TNG forward.
This is going to be a difficult question, Dan. Not difficult as in really challenging, but I think it's going to be interesting to separate this. You're doing a Star Trek podcast, so obviously you're rewatching episodes that are required for you to watch because it's going to be a topic on your show.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that you also watch episodes of your own choosing simply because you want to watch them.
Yes, absolutely. That goes without saying.
So my question is, when I want to talk about the ones that you're choosing to watch, how do you adjudicate which ones it's going to be? Are you a disciplined sequential rewatcher, or do you kind of jump around, or do you work your way through certain series or movies, or how do you decide? Is it emotion? Is it mood? Is it what's going on?
There's no reasoning for what I decide to watch and whatever series. I will say, as many of my listeners know, Deep Space Nine is my favorite series. So chances are, if I'm just going to throw on the TV and go into my library or go into Netflix, chances are I'm going to check Deep Space Nine first. But I'll watch anything. What I like to do from time to time when Netflix comes on is just go into the type in Star Trek for the search so I can see them all there, and then I'll just randomly pick a series, randomly pick a season, and just pick something. I'm the type of person that on Trek Geeks we have see it or skip it episodes, which you were a guest on recently, and if it's an episode that's just really a clunker, I might not watch it, but everything is fair game. Depending on if I want to see something that's got a lot of action, I might pick something from the Dominion War. If I'm in a romantic mood, I'll pick a romance episode, something like that. There's no real rhyme or reason to what I watch and when I watch it, because they all mean so much to me. It doesn't matter what's on. It's Star Trek, and I'll watch it.
I want to come back to something you'd mentioned, which was I was on your see it or skip it for Deep Space Nine Season 3. And one of the episodes that's in that season is Explorers, which is the episode where Sisko and Jake, they build that Bajoran spaceship and so forth. Mm-hmm. And, I think if I was watching like you were in that scenario when I'd watched it, where I had just turned it on and watched it, I think I would have loved the episode a lot more. But I found that there was something about watching it in sequence where it had just come off this gigantic warfare episode with all this major political drama. And then the captain decides to spend 3 months building a spaceship replica that it just, I found it weird. So I think there's a difference. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say is that's a problem that Star Trek has had from its early inceptions with TOS, isn't it? I mean, we'd see something happen on TOS or even TNG for that matter. Something traumatic happens, and then next week it's like, no, everything's fine. Oh, Worf's spine got snapped in the last episode. No problem. We'll be fine next week. We'll just go on another adventure, and that's something that Deep Space Nine suffered from time to time as well. So I definitely hear what you're saying, and I agree. If you were to throw this on and not having watched the episode before it, or maybe the episode after it, it's an amazing episode. It's a great bonding episode with father and son in this adventure that they're on together. You had no idea what was going on the week before because it was as if it never happened. And we've talked about that on the show many times, that it's just this bottle episode week to week thing, which is why I like the later episodes in Deep Space Nine. And of course, I love what Discovery did with season 1. It's this long, epic arc where things happen over a great amount of time. And there's no, things just thrown in there that people will be like, huh, wait, what happened last week? But yeah, I totally hear what you're saying with Explorers. That's a perfect example.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just to think about how fans, when they're binging shows these days, they have a very different experience than when you're just sampling. And they don't necessarily have the time to reflect on the episodes that we were forced to do, you and I, because we're similar in age, where, an episode was selected for you. You had to watch it or not. And then you didn't get any Star Trek. And then you had to wait a week or till the next day to get an episode, which was, again, selected for you. So I think it's interesting. And this is a conversation I want to have with people who are really into Discovery. I think that's going to be an interesting thing to explore.
It's amazing. You brought it when, we're the same age or similar age, like you said. Back in those days, not only did we have to wait to see what we would get, but we never theoretically saw things in the order that the episodes originally aired. I mean, you could be watching Trouble with Tribbles one night and the next night it's Charlie X. You never had any idea how the station was going to present these episodes. And the other thing that was strange is I don't think at any time when I was growing up watching on Channel 56 that all of the episodes of TOS were shown. They just start, playing a block of 20 and then just repeat that 20 again, which was really too bad for those that, didn't have other means or other stations or whatnot that they could watch it on. But nowadays, gosh, everything's right at your fingertips. You can watch anything right when you want to. You can watch them in order. You can watch them out of order. It's really amazing what technology has allowed new fans to have when they start getting into the different series.
You just turned a lock for me, or turned a key for me, I should say, because I think that I had a similar experience growing up in New York City, watching Star Trek every night, cross-legged on the carpet in front of this black and white TV that my grandfather handed down to me. And I seem to think that there was a certain number of episodes that got replayed a lot, and some that I just didn't see that much of. Yeah. So that's interesting. I have to think about that. Why did that happen? So I don't know. If anybody out there knows, to let me know. Send me some email, feedback@TrekProfiles.com, or hit me up on the Twitter and we'll figure it out. Dan, one of the questions I asked was, who is your favorite character? And you said Odo from Deep Space Nine. Now, he is a gruff character who scoffs a lot. And you seem like if I'm not being too forward here, a very gregarious and fun-loving guy. I don't necessarily see you guys going together here. I see a little oil and vinegar sort of mix. So tell me what's going on here.
Well, Odo is my Bill Smith, I guess you could say. No, I'm just kidding. Odo, for me, I actually said this to Bill. We did an Odo and Quark episode not too long ago, and Odo is the kind of guy that I would love to hang out with because he's the kind of guy that doesn't want to hang out with anybody. And that sounds a little strange, but there's something about him. He's got that gruffness, but he's cool. He has his set ways with justice, except when it comes to Quark. And he's just someone that he doesn't sugarcoat anything, which I'm a big fan of. I can't stand political correctness. I can't stand beating around the bush. Say it like it is, whether it's going to be something that you want to hear or don't want to hear. I'd rather have that than a bunch of fluff that doesn't make any sense. And I just love Renee. I just think that he is so good as this character. He adds so many layers to the Odo character. And I didn't like Odo at first. I didn't like the way he looked. I didn't like the dialogue that he had, but it didn't take long for me to really start digging the character. And all the way up through the end of the series, it was just, when it was an Odo episode, I was glued to my TV. I love every mannerism that he has, his grunts and all that kind of stuff. He just makes me smile, and that's what I love about him.
Well, it's funny because as we record, there you go. You got to do your Odo scoff right there. As we record this, I'm actually doing a Deep Space Nine rewatch, and I'm early in season 4. And just today, I finished the episode where Worf basically bungles his way into Odo's investigation, and Odo just calibrates him left and right. And like, he doesn't tell him where to go and how to be and what to do, but he tells him where to go and how to be and what to do. And it was just glorious.
What's so great about that is not that particular episode, but a perfect example of why I like Odo so much is the first episode with Worf and Way of the Warrior, when Worf is up on the promenade and he's deciding what he needs to do, and Odo comes over and he's like, it all seems so different up here, and he's trying to be nice, but as soon as Worf kind of insults him a little bit, that whole shield that Odo is so good at having comes right up, and he instantly turns into the constable instead of Odo. And I think that's a great layer of Odo, is how he's able to do that. And it's something I've always appreciated.
Nice. So he's your favorite good guy. Let's take a look at some of your villains, your guest characters or aliens. You have an interesting duo here. I might refer to them as the Laurel and Hardy of Deep Space Nine bad dudes, Gul Dukat and Weyoun. So
yes.
Tell me how you adjudicated these two guys being at the top of your list.
Well, I'll start with Weyoun. Gul Dukat is my favorite, and I'll get into him in just a minute. But Weyoun, Jeffrey Combs is an absolute genius as this character. I remember the first time we saw Weyoun, and he was vaporized at the end of the episode. And I was so disappointed that happened, because I thought that he was an intriguing character. I loved the look of the Vorta. I liked the way that he was a slimy politician, but at the same time was just a pawn of the Founders. And he really played the role well. And then when he came back again and again and again, he had a layer of humor and a layer of mystery that really, really hit me. And his voice is so fluid and so hypnotizing, except when he's Brunt, because of course it's the same guy. But Weyoun, as at the end of the series, when he has his loyalty to the Founders, and the episode where he has the loyalty to Odo when he wants to defect, is really something that strikes a chord with me. And I think that Jeff Combs just does a fantastic job. There's no Weyoun moment that I dislike in any of the appearances that he makes. He's that strong a character for me. That's why I picked him as one of my favorite aliens.
So let me ask you a question about that. Do you feel that Weyoun made you root for the Dominion in some of his episodes, even a little bit? I mean, if you like the guy so much, you had to want to see him come out on top from time to time.
No, not at all, actually. That's a great question. As much as I loved Weyoun, I never wanted the Dominion to win. I wanted him to win, which is kind of a weird thing to say. All of his little, back and forths with Dukat or with Damar later in the series, I always like to see who would come out on top with the snarky comments or the insults. And he had some great ones, and I always thought it was great. But I just thought that he was a character that was fun to watch, but I never for a second had any rooting for the Dominion to win, although I love the Dominion.
Love the Dominion as in, like, I want to relocate there and get my passport stamped, or love the Dominion like, I want to have space babies with it?
I think Bill wants me to relocate to the Dominion. No, I love the idea of the Dominion.
By the way, I'm sure Bill is listening to this with a little whiteboard, and he's like ticking down the number of things he's going to have to get you back for.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Whoever thought of the Dominion as a major enemy for the Federation is my hero, because they did this in a way. Remember how incredibly scared we all were of the Borg with TNG in Q Who and then in The Best of Both Worlds. The
Oh,
Dominion
yeah.
to me is more than that, because they're not this, this robotic, we're just going to assimilate everything. They had these devious ways of doing things and of taking over and of conquering. And I just thought it was an interesting dilemma that Cisco and the Federation had to deal with. And I thought the whole idea of the Dominion and the founders, and when they decided that it was going to be Odo's people who were going to be the founders, it's just mind-boggling how they were able to come up with this storyline and keep it going in a way that made sense and kept you intrigued as to what was going to happen next.
Nice. Okay. I think I understand. So, Dan, we've talked about your experience with Weyoun and how you love the Dominion. So now you got to tell me about Gul Dukat.
To put it as bluntly as I can, for me, in my humble opinion, Gul Dukat is the best Trek villain in Star Trek history. He is a chess player. He is an egomaniac. He is every level of scum that you can think of, but he thinks he's doing it all for the right reasons. And Mark Alaimo plays this character with such grace and such intenseness that right from episode 1, I just knew that this guy was going to be someone that I was going to love to hate and love at the same time. He is the way that he just holds himself as a Cardassian in that makeup with that cobra-like neck, which for me stands out on him more than any other actor who plays a Cardassian. He is just great.
Totally agree with you on that, by the way.
Thank you.
I totally agree. He really pulls it off.
He does. And not only just with any actor that he's working with on the screen, the dynamic that he and Avery had when they were doing scenes together is quite possibly, to me, the best pairing of actors that you can have in a show that went on as long as Deep Space Nine did. Gul Dukat is amazing. I think he is phenomenal. I love him, as strange as that may sound. I love all the bad guys, but maybe that says something about me. I don't know, but he's been my favorite. That hasn't changed since Deep Space Nine was on the air. With everything else that's gone on in Trek, he's still my number one.
You have to like and respect the villain to some degree. I mean, I think that's might be why the Ferengi failed in TNG, is right from the beginning. They were like ridiculous caricatures. They weren't for real, and the thing about Dukat is that he brought that sense of gravitas. He brought the sense, Mark Alaimo had this sense that you were dealing with a fully conceptualized person that had their own desires and their own plans and were fully justified in their own head as to what they were doing. And that makes the episode go down easier. It makes the story go down easier when you have that kind of relationship with the villain. If you think they're just Looney Tunes, mustache twirling buffoons, you don't get anywhere.
That's one of the things I like so much about Mark's portrayal of Gul Dukat. He was the villain, but he wasn't the mustache twirling one. It's amazing that in some of the episodes, Waltz comes to mind. He thought that everything he was doing to the Bajorans was the right thing to do. He's murdering and enslaving and torturing, and he thinks he's doing them a favor, and he believes it with every fiber of his being. And that's something to me that just made the character all that more mysterious isn't the right word, but of course we know that he's completely Looney Tunes by that point, but it's just pulled off with such amazing acting skills by Mark. It's just something I've always appreciated.
No, it's a great pick. It's a great pick. And I think a lot of fans out there would agree with you that he's certainly in, I think, everyone's top 5 list for great Star Trek villains, for sure.
Nice.
Dan, I want to turn a little bit, and I want to talk about this podcast that you do, Trek Geeks. Certainly an institution among Star Trek fandom. You and Bill, you guys are legends for what you do. But for those who don't actually podcast, I hope they understand how much time and effort goes into creating these things. And it's a major time sink. I mean, it's a lot of effort. So what I want to put to you is, why do you do it, and what do you get out of it?
Well, Bill and I have always said that on top of everything else, Trek Geeks is a reflection of the great friendship that we have had for over 2 decades through the lens of Star Trek. We both worked together. We met by working at the same company over 20 years ago. And right off the bat, we discovered that we were each Star Trek fans, and that instantly kicked off our friendship. And it has gone until now. And oh gosh, when was it? 2014. There was a break of time where we didn't actually see each other for a while. And we can get into the reason why later on. But we did get back together. We met one afternoon just by chance. And it was if, we had just been seeing each other every week or every few days like we had been previously. And there was a convention that was going to be happening in Boston in 2014. And he said, "Hey, let's go to the Star Trek convention." I said, "Yeah, why not?" We had a great time. The friendship was back in full swing. Not that it ever had actually left. And he said to me, he goes, "Hey, I've been thinking about doing a podcast about Star Trek. What do you think?" And I was like, "No, what's a podcast? I have no idea what that even is. I have no interest in that." So it was kind of funny. He kept talking to me about it, and we finally decided to do it. And it's great for a bunch of different reasons. One, I could spend all day talking to anybody about why I love Star Trek, whether it's specific episodes, characters, movies, ideas, ideologies, anything like that. It's what I love. It's my passion. So to have a medium to do it where, oh my God, are you kidding me? People actually are going to listen to two geeks from New Hampshire talking about their favorite show. That's insane. But it's something that we just love to do. And the time, to your point, the time that we put into it isn't any kind of burden or, oh my God, I don't want to do this. We look forward to it every single week. We come up with different ideas for what we want to do every week. We do the research. We watch the episodes or movies if there are specific ones that we're talking about. We come up with ideas to discuss. We look at the latest news headlines and talk about it in a segment. That's what happens when you love something as much as we do. And what we have always said to add to that is when it's not fun anymore, we're not going to do it. We're going to stop. But neither one of us think that is going to happen ever because we have such fun doing it. The only thing that doesn't happen, which doesn't even bother me, is we don't get paid for it. If that would be the dream job of a lifetime, is to sit there and talk about what you love so much with your best friend and every single episode have a great time talking about it. That's what makes it so fun, is because we enjoy it together so much. And Bill, you can send me that check at address blah, 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 for saying nice things about you.
So, well, but I want to see if I've heard you correctly. So it sounds to me like it's really about your friendship with Bill, and Star Trek is really, it gives you something to do together.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. That's the way that we've always prefaced it. I don't want to sound like I'm putting down any podcast when I say what I'm about to say. You can listen to people talk about their thing that they like as much as you want, whether it's Star Trek, Star Wars, Firefly. Does anybody? No, I'm just kidding. Anything, and I say that.
Hey, now we love everybody here on Trek Profiles.
Everybody, every single show, everybody's genre. See, that's the thing. Everybody loves something. So our friendship is so great, and we just get to talk about Star Trek through our friendship. Now, anybody who listens to the show knows that we rib each other constantly, and we quote unquote insult each other all the time. That's what we do. That's what we have fun with. And then we wrap Star Trek around it and have a great time. I can't think of anything better that I'd want to do with someone like Bill is to do this on a weekly basis with him and just have fun and have people enjoy listening to us. It's the best feeling in the world.
There's something to what you're saying, and let me see if I can approach it this way. I was talking to someone, and I think it was in a work context, because I work in organizational psychology and in leadership development and in human performance improvement, and basically what a lot of people call corporate training. That's what I do. And one of the things that someone had taught me in that context is that there's a gender stereotype that women best connect face to face and men connect shoulder to shoulder. And that's a terrible shorthand and a horrible generalization. But I think that you've just hit on an example about it, is that you connect to your friend, not by necessarily being together and talking to one another about yourselves, but by doing something together, which in this case is doing the podcast. And it just made that connection for me. And I thought that might be a psychological truth about what you described to me.
Well, not only that, but we don't, you said it, shoulder to shoulder for guys is good, because I don't really want to look at Bill's face anyway. So he's going to be writing that one down, I'm sure.
do you know that I am going to, you know what? I've realized that I've dug myself into a ditch here, Dan. You know why? because without any malice, without any planning for any of this, Bill was on the show first and you're second. So now you get to beat him up and know that he's not going to be on Trek Profiles to get back at you. So he's going to be, raring to go on the next episode of Trek Geeks. So y'all should check that out because both guns are going to be blazing.
I will say also, I listened to the show with Bill and it was a fantastic show and he was nice. We rib each other all the time and I said, you know what? I'm going on next. He's not going to have any way to get back at me on your show, so I'm going to have fun with it. In all seriousness, no. He's the best guy to do this with. I just love the guy to death. He is my brother in so many ways. And I can't imagine being on this ride with Trek Geeks or Discovering Trek with anybody else but him. It has been a tremendous adventure. And as Star Trek, the motion picture, the Trek Geeks adventure is just beginning. And I really am looking forward to continuing it along with him.
You know what? I'm crying, man, for you two. It's like so sweet, man. It's like this major bromance going on. It's like I hear the violins coming up. It's so sweet. But no, I'll say, I think I've had the same experience. My very best friend, who also lives in New Hampshire, strangely enough. So I have a Granite State connection there with you. And by the way, I went to UNH. I don't know if you know that.
Oh, I did not know that. Excellent.
Yeah, I lived in Exeter for almost 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I drove across the border into Massachusetts for my job, and I worked my way through UNH until I graduated. But anyway, nice. I knew my friend, but even before I had moved there, and he was having a rough patch in his life, which is neither here nor there. But I wanted to go out and see him, and he had just moved into a bachelor apartment, and so I said, "I'm going to come out and help you put together furniture." And he's like, "Yeah, that's good." Because if I was just going to say, I'm going to come out and console you and, we're going to hang out, that wouldn't have been good. But I was like, oh, man, you just bought a bunch of flat packs from IKEA? Well, you're going to need some help, dude. You're not supposed to lift those flat packs without help. So I better buy a ticket and come out. And he's like, yeah, that'd be a good idea. So, yeah, it's these lies we tell ourselves that make life, bearable, right?
Right. Absolutely. Good point.
So anyway, I want to ask you about just a couple of other things here as far as your fandom before we move on.
Sure.
Which is, do you collect anything? What do you collect as far as Star Trek, and where do you display it, or do you lock it up, or how do you what do you do with all your things?
I have so much stuff I can't even tell you. I've collected so many things through the years. Franklin Mint sculptures back in the day were the things that I loved the most at the time. I have an absolutely beautiful, gorgeous Franklin Mint original series chess set. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's silver, and the board is kind of like a representation of the galaxy. And the good guys are in gold, the bad guys are in silver. And I just think that is just absolutely beautiful. It is in storage while we're moving, but everything, plates, novels, figures. But right now, I have to say my current love of Star Trek memorabilia are the amazing set of Star Trek pins from fan sets. We have a great relationship with them over on Discovering Trek, and I think I've purchased every single Star Trek pin there is to date so far. They're gorgeous. They are very high quality, and I display them very proudly at both work and at home. And I have a couple of those like little cases that you can store them in so that they don't get damaged. But I've collected so much stuff. I can't even tell you how much stuff I have packed away.
I want to call out something you just said there and examine it for a second, Dan. You said that you display them. If you display them, the question must be asked, for whom do you display them? Is it something where you want to show the world or the people around you in the workplace or the people who come to your home about your fandom, or is it for you in some way? I mean, who's the intended audience of these displays?
I think it's for both, and that's kind of an on-the-fence answer, but I love to look at the stuff that I have because I love Trek so much. So I'll just be, working in my cube, and I'll just, out of the corner of my eye, I'll see a couple of pins over on the one side of my PC, and it'll just make me think of an episode or of that character. But at the same time, I really enjoy it when people come over and say something. Just the other day, one of the top executives of my company was walking by my desk, and he looked over and he goes, "This is a real nice collection you got here, Dan." And I didn't even know what to say because I'm like, oh my God, you're like one of the top people in the company. I'm not even supposed to be talking to you, but he really appreciated it. And I think that's something that's great. I mean, not that I expect that this would happen, but I don't know, maybe you can look at this ridiculous similarity that I'm going to try to make here, and it's probably not going to make any sense. You know, during political season, when people put 1,000 political signs out on the street as if that's going to
Yep.
make somebody vote for that person.
Oh, yeah. I was living in New Hampshire during one of the first in the nation primaries, and I remember what it was like. It was crazy. I couldn't go to the grocery store without getting 7 pollsters, and I wanted to start punching them all in the face.
Yep. Well, I don't know if maybe somewhere in the back, deep, dark corners of my mind, if I have the USS Discovery facing off against the USS Enterprise, just like in the season finale of season 1 on my cube, somebody's going to walk over and ask me about it, and I'm going to talk them into watching the show, and they're going to love it. So it's for me, it's for other people, and it's to quite possibly help bring new people into fandom, which is a win-win for everybody, in my opinion.
So you're saying that you're basically a Borg and you assimilate them.
I'm not going to disagree with that. Not at all. I have 4 Borg on my cube, as a matter of fact.
No, I love it. I think it's perfectly okay. All right. So, Dan, I want to start talking about some episodes. And as always, I've had the M5 do some gentle internet sleuthing and a little bit of data analysis. And I had him put together some episodes. And generally speaking, I like to address them in 2 different categories. And they may or may not overlap. So I have a list of what you might consider to be some of the best episodes of all Star Trek, and also the episodes that you might decide are very meaningful to you. And we'll see how the M5 did in a minute. But I thought we might start with the best episodes. Is that all right with you?
Okay. That sounds great.
At the top of the list is Deep Space Nine, The Visitor. I actually can tell you I rewatched this episode today, and I have some pretty probably divergent thoughts from you about it. So let's find out first why you might think it's one of the best episodes of Star Trek, and then we'll see if we can figure some things out. So tell me about it.
Well, quite simply put, I think The Visitor is the best episode of Deep Space Nine and is probably the best episode of Star Trek, period. It is an amazingly loving, wonderful story about the bond between a father and a son. And Jake goes through his entire life regretting what happened with his father on the Defiant and actually sacrifices himself so that he can get his father back when he was a boy through this time scenario where he breaks the rubber band, he snaps the band, so to speak. It's an amazingly powerful episode, unbelievably performed by Tony Todd as Jake, and of course by Avery as Ben. It's just so wonderful, and for me, one of the things that's so emotionally powerful with this episode is at the end of the episode, Ben is saved and it's back to the normal time, and Jake is okay and Ben's okay, but Jake doesn't, of course, have any memory of what happened because what happened hasn't happened for him yet. But Ben remembers everything. He remembers that his son got married and his wife left him because of this obsession that he had with saving his father. He knows about the pain that Jake went through to try and save his dad and fail time after time until he was an old man and realized that he had to die in order for him to save his father. So he kills himself. That's unbelievable. It's an amazingly powerful, dramatic, and emotional episode. And it is just such a treat to watch that at any given time. You could be in the whatever mood you're in, you put on The Visitor and you're going to cry. You're going to weep at the end. That one scene where he's hugging old Jake and saying, "My sweet boy," and he's, twice as young as old Jake. It's just amazing. I can't say enough about this episode. It is the top of my list.
Dan, I want to put some questions to you, not in the interest of raising the temperature, but I did have a different reaction to some of it. And I want to hit you with this to see if we can maybe figure some things out here.
Sure.
And so I'm not trying intentionally to be provocative, and I mean that sincerely. But as I watch the episode, it's an episode that's about essentially a child committing suicide.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something I can get behind. And I suppose as I watch the episode, I think this is the kind of episode that when I was younger, I may have had a very different reaction to it than when I was a married person and as a father. Because a parent should be living their life and for the child and not vice versa. And it was a mistake. And Cisco did not try hard enough to convince Jake the rightness of his actions, to move forward with his life. So this is essentially about Ben's failure as a father to convince his son to live the life that he's been given to its fullest. It's an episode about the father failing the son.
I can appreciate that take on it. However, I look at it as, at this point, as the story unfolds, Jake is now an adult and he's becoming older, and then he's an old man, and he's the father figure, maybe, kind of, if you look at it that way. It's interesting. I know that we're going to get into a discussion about captive pursuit later, but I can tell you firsthand and personally that when somebody thinks that suicide is the best way to take care of a problem, you're not going to be able to talk that person out of it. It's almost impossible to do, and I know that firsthand. Jake knew or believed in his heart that doing this would set everything back the way that it was, quote unquote, supposed to be. I can totally understand the idea of the father should outlive the son, the son should outlive the father.
Vice versa. Yeah. I got you.
But I think that he did try. He told him he needed to live his life. He needed to, to stop worrying about it, to be a writer, to live his life with his wife and have a family of his own. Obsession's a tricky thing, man. It can be something that no matter who you have talking to you, it might not be enough. And I think that's what was going on with Jake in this episode. He was obsessed with finding out a way to get his father back once he discovered that his father was trapped in this non-time area or dimension or whatnot. So he spent the rest of his life doing what he could, doing the calculations and figuring out that if he snapped the band, as he puts it, that everything would be set right. And gosh, I understand that it can ruffle feathers, but if we had the ability to do things with science in real life that they're able to do with science fiction, like something like this with the whole time episode and like that, I can't say whether or not I would do the same thing if I needed to get my father back and that was the only way to do it. It's that powerful an episode for me. That make sense?
It does. Let me go another way, because I want to stay with this a minute. I know we got a bunch of other stuff to talk about, but I think this is really important because I want to get to the core of this with you, Dan. You're a married man. I'm a married man.
Yep.
If you ask my wife, how's John as a husband, I'm sure she'd have a lot to say about that. I don't know what I've figured out about marriage, being married for 13, almost 14 years. But one thing I'm fairly convinced of is that marriage is about publicly declaring this other person I place above all others. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be together and we're going to be the fullest partners in all things in this world. And that's really what marriage is, right? It's not like we're together just because, but it's about, I choose you, you choose me, we're in it together. We're the main thing in each other's life. And then when kids come into the picture, there's a different dynamic that happens. Jake intentionally, and I don't mean intentionally, he neglects that marriage concept to the point where she leaves him in favor of his father. And if you had a friend in your life, like right now, as we record this in 2018, who said, well, I'm married to this person, we have a great marriage, but my dad says I should, I'm really concerned about my dad, so I think I'm going to leave her. Barring other facts of the case, I mean, I think many people would find that shocking.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think that that's the key mistake that Jake made in this episode. He should never got married. He was obsessed with finding his father, and that should have deterred him from having this fake life with this woman that ended up ending. Let's put it this way. Scrooge, when he was courting, oh gosh, what was her name? Was it Isabella? I forget what that girl's name was in A Christmas Carol. He was more.
Oh, I can't remember.
He was more concerned with earning profit. Hey, Ferengi stuff. Than being with this woman, and to the point where she saw it and she left. And that is what should have happened either by Jake not getting married or by the woman leaving before they even got married. I totally agree with what you're saying in there. That was the one thing. I mean, you just said it. My wife is on a pedestal higher than nothing else, and that doesn't change. And that's if I want to say there's a flaw in that episode, that may be it. But at the same time, I know why the writers did it, so that they can show just how determined he was to save his father, that he was willing to give up his life and marriage to this woman that he seemed to love at the time when we saw her on the screen for the whole, 3-4 minutes.
Yeah. And, that's, I think, in a way is what I think my feeling is about the episode, which is, I'll just offer this one last provocation and then we'll move on. But I think that in many ways that Jake spent his entire life as a child. He never advanced beyond where he was at the moment he lost his father. And so he took the life that had been given him and didn't explore it to the fullest, which in my way of thinking is a very anti-Star Trek message. We're supposed to live our lives to the fullest and to better ourselves, as Captain Picard said in that episode where they find the three people from the 21st century floating around in space. I'm sure you remember the episode. Mm-hmm. And Jake decides not to do that. He gives up writing in his 30s. Mm-hmm. He sees his dad one more time, and he dismisses his wife essentially through neglect and goes to all this schooling. And I thought at its heart that was possibly a message that was contrary to what we'd seen in a lot of Star Trek before. I'll let you respond to it, and then we'll move on. And well, actually, that's not true. I'm lying. I'll say one more thing after that, but it's not a thing that I'll let you respond to. Go ahead.
No, not a problem. I see where you're coming from, but at the same time, one of the things that I love about Star Trek, and some people probably hate, is as much as that is a correct statement on some levels, that he kind of gave up being, living his life to the fullest. He knew deep down inside that no matter how long it took, he was going to be able to click that all-important Star Trek reset button, and none of it would have happened. And that's something that I can't just wave off as, he went through his entire quote-unquote life, and probably, what is it, maybe 70 years that he lived over the course of what he looked like when he did die, as to when the accident happened on the Defiant. But he knew it was going to work, and I don't know. Like I said, when you're that close-minded and you have a goal and you're focused on it, nothing's going to make you change that path, or nobody's going to talk you out of it. Is it anti-Star Trek? I don't know if I could call it that. I can understand that some people might not think it's the best way to tell a story. But at the end, I think the root of the episode, which is family and love and sacrifice for those that you love, is what I focus on more. Does that make sense?
Well said, Dan. I can respect your position on it. That was just my position. But the one thing I do want to say is that the amazing thing about the episode for me was the performances and I want to say the whole production design in Jake's house was really just stellar. And I think it was because it was such a break from sort of the sterile designs that we'd had in the past. Mm-hmm. So as a production, it was just amazing. The performances were really stellar. But I think it was that one issue in the writing and in the plot that, really caused me to seize up a little bit. But, I'm open to reevaluating my position on it. And I'm sure Dan would welcome your feedback too. So hit us up on the Twitter or the Facebook or send us email. Let us know what you think. Happy to engage with my tens of listeners on that. So let us know what you think. All right. Let's move on to another episode. And it looks like we've got a couple of Deep Space Nine episodes here. So continuing with that theme, I'll give you two, and maybe you can pick which one you want to do first. Far Beyond the Stars and In the Pale Moonlight. Both very notable Deep Space Nine episodes, and both would probably be on a lot of favorites lists. So tell me where you want to go.
Let's start with In the Pale Moonlight, I guess, because Far Beyond the Stars got a very strong message to it that we can focus on afterwards. It's funny, we were just talking about what you thought were parts of The Visitor that were not Star Trek at heart. If there's an episode that's not Star Trek at heart, it's In the Pale Moonlight. I mean, Cisco does all kinds of things that you would never expect a Starfleet officer to do. I mean, he bribes. He's a accomplice to murder. I mean, all of these things. Yet he does what he has to do to help win the war, which is a great shadow as to what war does to people. I guess possibly is a message here. This is an amazing episode for me. There's action, there's intrigue. Of course, anything with Andy Robinson as Garrick is just pure gold, and this is one of the best that he does. One of my favorite scenes is the Hollow Suite when they're pretending that they're at Cardassia and they're making that the datalytic rod or whatever it's called.
The fake video or whatever. Yeah.
It's just great, and of course. I don't even know why we even know about this episode because Cisco deletes the whole personal log at the end of the episode. So how do we even know what happened? Right?
Yeah.
No, in all seriousness, it's great. It shows the level that Cisco is willing to stoop to in order to win the war by bringing the Romulans in, even if it's in a dishonest way. That's as anti-Star Trek as you can get, I think. But still, the episode for me just works brilliantly.
Dan, as we record this, there's a news story that's been going around for quite a number of years now at a slow boil about a company called Theranos. Are you familiar with this company, and have you seen any of the news coverage? I
have to say, honestly, I am not familiar with that.
There's a book that's just come out that I bought and read at least twice. I would say 2.5 times because I went back and read certain parts again. And it's a case of a young woman named Elizabeth Holmes. And this is true. This is not a fiction. This is a true story. Mm-hmm. She drops out of Stanford at age 19 and decides to start a medical business in Silicon Valley. And her whole theory is that she's going to build a device that's going to revolutionize medical tests. So, when you go to your doctor and he sends you for lab tests and you go to the lab and they draw like three vials of blood or 5 vials of blood from you, right?
Sure.
Her whole thing was, I'm going to invent a machine that does all those tests with a finger prick. Like those little glucose monitors that the diabetics use.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And I'm going to come back to Star Trek in a minute with this. But she basically started this company and got significant investment. And we're talking on the order of her company was valued at billions of dollars. Mm. The entire thing was fake.
No.
There was nothing to any of this.
Wow.
It was all a scam. And her board of directors was like all of these serious people. George Shultz, who was Secretary of State for the first George Bush, who orchestrated the first Gulf War, very serious guy. General Mattis, who, as we currently speak, is the Secretary of Defense. One of her investors was like one of the biggest investors in Silicon Valley, a guy named Draper. Anyway, the whole point I bring this up is that there were cases where in the story, so as an example, Walgreens decides they're going to invest with Theranos because they want these machines in their stores. So they hire a guy who's a specialist and an expert in blood tests. He goes with them to Theranos. He says, I want to see the machine. I want to run my blood. And then I'm going to leave here and go to Stanford Hospital and get a blood draw and have it sent to a real lab. And I want to compare the results, which seems like a normal thing, right?
I would think so.
They tell him, oh, no, we didn't get enough warning. We can't do that. And then they go to Walgreens and they say, yeah, this guy's trouble. We don't want him. And Walgreens says, okay. And they fire their own consultant who they brought on to safeguard their own interests. Now, why am I telling you this story? First of all, it's an interesting book, and y'all should read it. It's called Bad Blood, and the author is John Carreyrou. He's a Wall Street Journal reporter. The book is absolutely excellent. I cannot recommend it highly enough, but that's neither here nor there. The second thing is that there's no lies that people can't convince themselves of. Mm-hmm. This woman, to this day, as we speak, she's had an SEC settlement against her. Criminal charges are filed against her for wire fraud and many other charges on the docket. And yet she's trying to raise money for another business that she's trying to start.
Unreal.
And that's a real thing. I mean, this isn't Star Trek. This is really happening as we record this. And so I think that this episode that you bring up, right, in the Pale Moonlight, it's an example of here's a guy like Cisco that even in the 24th century, we can delude ourselves and really believe that we're in the right, even when we're not.
Right. Absolutely. So let me ask you this, John. Is it safe to say that if you're talking about, was it Theranos?
Yeah, that's the name of the company. Yeah.
You could say, it's a fake.
Dude, off the top rope. It is a fake.
Boom.
Thank you for that. Boom. All right, I don't even know what to say from here. All right. Well, that's good. So let's move on. Let's talk about Far Beyond the Stars.
Yes.
A delightful episode in many ways, but also touches on some very profound things. And I just want to preface this by saying my favorite thing about the episode, and I'll let you respond to it, which is we got to see the actors do something very different and stretch their muscles, their thespian skills in a whole new way, which was very delightful for me. So how about you?
Absolutely. That's my favorite part of the episode as well. We get to see characters that are always covered up in makeup without makeup. We get to see Aaron. We get to see JG. We get to see Renee and Armin. All of these people without just tons and layers of makeup and sofa cushions for wardrobe and stuff like that. And they do a great job portraying these people in this time in the past in the United States on Earth. But of course, the underlying tones of this is what Star Trek is all about. I mean, we look at the original series with Let That Be Your Last Battlefield and the idea of racism in that episode. Fast forward to Deep Space Nine. This episode is just so amazing and how it tackles racism and bigotry and all of the negativity that we have dealt with in society for so many generations and have so much more and so much farther to go. This episode encompasses what Star Trek is all about, and it does it in a way that is so classy. Avery did an amazing job with this episode, not only starring, but in directing this episode. Of course, he has personal stakes in this episode because of what he's gone through in his life. And it's just wonderfully done. And I think anybody who's never seen Star Trek, this is one of those ones that you need to watch to understand what Star Trek is and the hope that it has in the future. Now, this episode doesn't show a lot of hope because of all the bad things that happen and all the things that are being shown. I mean, and I hate the term the N-word. It just drives me crazy and has for years, but it's used in this episode and it works and it's done correctly. It's just magnificent.
As we record this in 2018, I don't think that episode would have been made the same way today, for sure.
No. Oh, I 100% agree with you. Yep, absolutely. And I mean, how many years ago was it? About 25, 24, 23 years ago that this one came out.
Something like that, yeah.
It holds up well, though. Even though it would not be made the same today, it holds up very well. And there's a lot of ideals and things that take place in that episode that are so important as to what's going on right now. It's amazing. The foresight, if that's the right word, that Avery had when he directed this episode. And of course, his performance, his breakdown is one of the greatest moments in Star Trek history. It is just amazing. I love this episode so much. It's so great. And even though it's got so much negativity in it and that racism, bigotry, it has hope. And I love how at the end he says, is he really Benny? And he's just seeing everything in his mind, or is Deep Space Nine real? It's just wonderfully put together.
How do you interpret the very final scene where Avery sees Benny in the reflection? What is that telling you about the episode?
I think for me that even though this is taking place so far in the future, 24th century, it could all happen still. I mean, unfortunately, we as humans tend to focus on the negative and do the negative. And even though Starfleet and the Federation and the world at that time frame is supposed to be this great utopia and this great paradise, there are still going to be people out there that are going to be as disgusting as they are today and were back in the 50s and 60s. And we always have to keep an eye out to make sure that stops happening, or in the case of the future with Deep Space Nine, doesn't happen again.
I agree with you that the messages of the episode are very powerful and very relevant, even for those of us in 2018 who are watching it. But a possible criticism of the episode is that it's what I called, when I was on Trek Geeks, it's a Tommy Westphall ending, where it suggests that Deep Space Nine and possibly all of Star Trek is only happening inside Benny's head and isn't real. How would you respond to that?
I've never thought that for a second. I can see what you're saying, but especially based on what we talked about recently when we had you over on Trek Geeks. But I've never thought it that way. I've thought of it just as a visual for us, the viewers, as to what Ben is saying when he's questioning it. I don't think it's an in your head. I don't think it's a Who Shot JR. I don't think it's a Tommy Westfall. Any of those things. Lost. Some people have a problem with Lost and how it ended. I'm not one of those people either. But it does pose a question. But I've just always been on the side that no, not at all. I've never had that thought for a second.
Well, speaking of Tommy Westfall episodes, The Inner Light is certainly a Tommy Westfall episode because it does all happen in Picard's head, and that's in the show that it is happening that way. But yet the M5 has indicated that you think it's an amazing episode. So explain yourself, Dan Davidson.
Has it happened in Picard's head, though? That flute,
don't do that.
That flute.
Don't do that.
That flute that they find at the end didn't come out of his head. I mean, the technology of an alien race, who knows what could have happened. But to me, one of the reasons that this is one of my favorite episodes in Star Trek is because we get to see what this 25 minutes in Picard's head, which I will give you that part, changes him forever. You know, you remember in the first half of the series, he doesn't like kids. He doesn't like family. He's captain, so he has to be isolated. He freaks out when Wesley's on the bridge and sitting in his chair. And then this happens. And he marries... What's that?
Oh yeah, I'm agreeing with you. I'm thinking of as we record this, we've just passed Captain Picard Day, which I believe was a season 2 episode. That was in a season 2 episode with because Dr. Pulaski was in it, and I remember how uncomfortable he was with that. So I was just expressing my agreement with your thoughts. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. I mean, he falls in love with this woman. He has children. Picard has children, and you see later on in the series, he feels completely different about children and family. He has relationships, and he is not this person who feels that he has to be alone, which is what every Starfleet captain seems to suffer from, except Ben, actually. But of course, Ben was alone, but for a different reason. It wasn't self-choosing. I just love the way that this episode is done. One of the quotes that I've always used throughout my adult life is to seize the day. Make now the most precious. Now will never come again. That's from this episode, and it rings true and has rung true for me for many, many years.
Yeah, it's Picard speaking to, or Kamen speaking to Maribor,
exactly.
His daughter in the episode, if I recall if I recall it right.
Yep, absolutely. And sort of along the lines of The Visitor and Deep Space Nine with the relationship with Ben and Jake, this episode is very strong with family. And it means a lot to me in that way as well. I love the science. Again, I love the science fiction aspect of this. You touched upon it just a minute ago. This all takes place. His entire life as Kamen takes place in 25 minutes on the bridge of the Enterprise. But you can't help but think that something occurred, that he really lived that, because when he sees that flute in that box, when Riker brings it to his quarters, that's one of the most powerful silent moments that I can remember ever in Star Trek, is the look on his face, and when he grabs that and just holds it to his chest and then starts playing that music, which that song can get me teary-eyed no matter what. You should have seen me at the Star Trek concert that Bill and I went to a couple of years ago with our wives when they played that, and there was a flute soloist who did that. I was a blubbering fool. It was magic.
I think that went on tour. I was at it. Yeah. When they came to Vegas, I went to that. So, we've been talking a lot about the idea of family in a lot of these episodes, and being in a family of your own choosing, right? With whoever you choose to be with, as opposed to the family that you're born with, I think is one of the most profound human experiences, and something that Picard had denied himself.
Right.
And intentionally, because he felt that his career was the main thing that he was interested in. Do you feel that had he not had this chance encounter, because his ship encountered the probe at the beginning of the episode, he would not be the great captain that he was, but the even higher levels that he obtained because he had that understanding of humanity that he got from having a family? He would have been lesser, far lesser, had he not experienced that.
I agree. Look at his reaction. I'll say yes. It definitely changed him, and he would not have been the same had this not happened, or he would have been the same, or if you understand what I mean. But this happened, and it completely this is a life-changing moment for Picard when this happens. There is nothing going forward that is the same with him after he experiences this. Now, he had family on Earth. His brother and his nephew both died in the fire in the beginning of Generations, which was a complete cop-out, in my opinion, for those characters. But that affects him greatly. And I have to question whether that would have affected him as much as it did had the inner light not happened. Add to that his being assimilated by the Borg. That was another life-changing moment. But I think that this one is actually more important because he discovers what he never has had before. Whereas with the Borg, he was just, tortured and forced to kill without being able to stop himself. So I definitely think that this moment made him a much greater captain and person going forward.
I completely agree with you on that one, Dan. I think we're totally in alignment on that. Let's move on and talk about a TOS episode. And I'm more of a TOS guy, so I'm kind of excited about this. And has one of my all-time favorite episodes. By the way, an episode that I will say as a preface is probably one of the episodes that gained the most during the remasters that they did.
Yes.
So the Doomsday Machine. Mm-hmm. Tell me why you believe this is one of the best episodes of all Star Trek.
Because it's so awesome. It's so fun. And you're absolutely right. I love the episode in the original, but after the remaster, this episode takes on a whole new level. This is one of the best episodes of TOS. It's brilliantly acted. The story is fantastic. The music in this episode is a character of its own. I had the honor of being on Brandon Shea Mutala's podcast with Andy Farber, who did music for Star Trek Continues, and we specifically talked about the music in Doomsday Machine for like an hour because it's such an amazing score and it has a life of its own. I just love Decker. I think he's a brilliant character, and you see the torment that he's gone through as a commander of a starship and losing his entire crew. It's fun. There's so many memorable lines, and you get to see things that you normally wouldn't see in other Star Trek episodes. Like, we talked about suicide. Decker commits suicide to try to kill the thing. It's just, there's a lot going on in this episode, and it's one of the best.
So you don't see a difference between trying to take out an enemy in a battle and choosing to end your own life?
Oh, there's a difference. But we were talking about how, Jake had the ability to reset everything so that his father wasn't stuck in, what's the word?
Subspace limbo.
Yeah, limbo, exactly. But at the same time, Decker decides to do this in the hope of killing it, but he wasn't sure. In my mind, Jake was sure that if he did what he had to do, it was going to fix everything. And I'm not so sure that in Decker's state of mind, he was sure. He was trying it. And as he said, he's been prepared to die since his crew died. So, I mean, I don't think they're the same.
Since you bring this up, I want to go back to the Visitor one more time.
Okay.
Because this is something that truly got to me, is that I'm agreeing with you that Jake did what he did because he wanted to give his father this chance, right? And he figures, after the end of all the subspace machinations and let's take the Defiant out and let's tech the tech and subspace inversion, none of that worked. He says, I can send him a message and tell him to avoid the discharge, right? Mm-hmm. At best, that's a roll of the dice. I mean, as we record this, Dan, if I was to tell you, if I was to physically tell you, if I was in the room with you and say, Dan, in a minute, a lightning bolt is going to come through the room, jump out of the way. What's the chance that you would jump the right way or know which way it's going to go or be able to move fast enough, right? At best, it was a roll of the die that even if Jake was successful in all the things he wanted to do, it was only for a flip of a coin.
That's a really good point. I can't argue with that, John. It's kind of along the same lines as, would Data understand what's sending the number 3 back in time when they kept getting caught in that temporal causality loop? I can't argue with you that it was a roll of the dice, but I think that he knew that it was the right thing to do.
Okay. I'm gonna leave it alone. I don't want to dwell on it too much, but it's because look, man, and we talked about this before we started recording. I put these questions to you and this is also for the listeners out there.
Sure.
I love my guests, and I am so grateful that people come on the show and want to explore their fandom with me. But part of that means I want to really put hard questions to people to see if we can figure out what is actually the episode about, and not only to help all of us think about our Star Trek fandom, because we know we love it. What I'm trying to answer is why, to help my guest figure out why. And so I want to help with that.
I think it's fantastic that you do that, because I'm going to be honest. When the next time I watch The Visitor, I'm going to be watching it through a different lens. And I don't think that's a bad thing at all. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to change my opinion of it, but I think that's what's great about having dialogue like this, and why we always talk about on our show, and people like Jim Morehouse on Trek Ranks. There's no wrong answers. Everybody's least favorite episode is somebody else's favorite, and every opinion that all of these people have about what happens in every episode isn't wrong. So I love the fact that we can talk about it and have different views on what's going on. And it's going to help by talking about it, and by people listening to it who are listening to the show now. The next time they watch the episode, they're going to look at it with a different thought in their mind based on what is different in our conversation. And I think that's great. That's one of the things I love about Star Trek.
I'd agree with you, Dan. It's something you said earlier, which is Star Trek's a lens, right? And you said it was a lens to talk about your friendship with Bill. I think that Star Trek is a lens for us to, as fans, to think about what it is that matters to us. And I know this is going to sound really corny, but when I was in college, I studied philosophy, and I didn't understand it at the time, although I thought I did. And it wasn't until I got to be much older when I started to reread the Greeks, and I got to this point in Plato's dialogues where we're talking about Socrates. And one of the things even people who never studied philosophy may have heard, Socrates once said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And what does that mean? It means that you should be living with purpose. And it's one thing just to go through the motions of your life and to, take the dog to the veterinarian and, take your kid to school and, pay your taxes or, do all these mundane things we all have to do every day. But I think, and, I could be wrong about this, but I think that Star Trek as a fandom and as a show puts questions to you as the watcher that helps you figure out what matters to you. And that's what I'm trying to figure out here on this show. That is what this show is about. And that's why I'm so grateful that y'all, the guests and the fans, the listeners, the tens of you, come with me on this little journey so that we can figure some of this stuff out. And I think it's really profound. And so with that having been said, I want to turn from the best episodes to a different category, which is episodes that are meaningful to you, Mr. Dan Davidson. Now, you've talked about this before in other venues, but I don't think we can have you on the show without talking about Captive Pursuit.
Sure.
An episode of Season 1, Deep Space Nine, where they meet their very first alien from the Gamma Quadrant, Tosk, which, by the way, as an aside, I'm not sure if Tosk is actually a name or a title. I think it's more of a title or a role than a name, but I don't know. But tell me why this episode is meaningful for you, Dan.
Sure. This episode, literally, without exaggeration, saved my life. We talked about suicide a couple times here on this show, and back in the late 90s, I was going through a very difficult time in another life, quote unquote. And my entire life had unraveled, lost my job over something that happened, and friends. And it was during that time where I actually had lost contact with Bill due to my own stupidity. I was in a very controlling relationship at the time, and things were really, really bleak. So much so that I thought that the only way that I could get out of this was to commit suicide. So I planned to do that. I was home alone all the time, curtains drawn, just completely inconsolable with my guilt and stuff like that. And I was being blamed in that relationship that I was in. It just snowballed. Everything was getting worse and worse and worse. And there was no way for me to seek help. I was kind of forced to deal with it on my own. And for anybody who's gone through tough situations, that's the worst part of it. When you are alone, you don't have anywhere to go. You don't think about what we talk about on our episode 114 of Trek Geeks. We talk about Captive Pursuit. We talk about the suicide prevention hotline. You don't think of that. Things that just don't enter your mind. So I was going to commit suicide. I was going to kill myself. I had everything done. I had the letter. I had the means to do it. I had a gun, and I was going to do it one night. And I had prepared everything, and I was ready to do it. And I don't exaggerate when I say I was as close to committing suicide as one can actually be without actually doing it. And as I had the gun in my mouth and was ready to pull the trigger, the hammer was already pulled. I used to have, as we talked earlier, I had VHS tapes of Star Trek series on, and for whatever reason, I had a Deep Space Nine tape in the machine, and it was playing. And Captive Pursuit happened to be on at the time. And as I was getting ready to do it, and it's not easy whether you're ready to do it or not. It's not something that you can just do. So, of course, there's that hesitation. And I just remember vividly just kind of staring off straight ahead, right at the TV during Captive Pursuit. And it was the scene where O'Brien was willing to risk everything to save the life of this alien that he barely knew. All life is important. He was ready to lose his career in Starfleet in order to save Tosk. And for whatever reason, those words that Colm Meaney was speaking at the time made me pause. And I sat there and watched the rest of the episode and didn't do anything. And then when the episode ended, I completely just crumpled to the floor, kind of like in a fetal position, and just cried, and I didn't do it. And it was still a very difficult time going forward. It took a long time for everything to get better, but things did get better. And I will forever be thankful to Star Trek, to Colm Meaney, to Captive Pursuit for literally saving my life. That episode has more meaning to me than any other episode of Star Trek or anything else entertainment-wise. Nothing even comes close. I mean, it's that important to me.
Dan, that's a very profound story. As I sit here, I think about the premise of this little podcast that I do, which is that Star Trek changes lives, right? Which is a conceit that's at the center of the show. You've just given an example of that. And I know that as a listener to Trek Geeks and as someone who has enjoyed your company for the time that we've been speaking and for the other interactions we've had, I just want to say, brother, I'm glad you're still here, and I'm glad to have known you. I feel like my life is enriched for having these conversations with you.
Well, I really appreciate it, man. Not a day goes by that I'm not thankful that for whatever reason, let me say this. I never really was a believer in fate, except for two things. That episode was on for a reason. That's the only explanation I can possibly have. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't there. I guarantee you, if Captive Pursuit was not playing that particular scene, I would be dead. I believe that 100%. And I also believe that all the bad things that happened, including that night where it almost happened so that I could meet the woman who I would eventually marry and be my wife today. We've been married for 15 years. Everything happens for a reason, and I am a believer in fate because of that. It warms my heart to hear someone like you say that to me, John. I have no embarrassment about talking about something like this with people because there are so many people that go through very difficult times and they feel that they don't have anybody to talk to and they feel that nobody wants to listen to them. And people do want to help. And as I have said on our show, or Bill and I show, and when talking to people one-on-one about this, if me talking about the tough times that I went through and almost ending it all can help one person getting through a tough time, then it's all worth it. And I have to say, nothing made me prouder than a couple of months ago. We got an email on our Trek Geeks page from a gentleman that had listened to the Captive Pursuit episode And he said that that episode saved his life because he was going through a tough time. I can't even fathom that, John. I cannot even fathom that me talking about it could have that much of an impact that it did. And I will forever be grateful to help anybody who's going through that tough time by sharing what happened to me.
Well, without diminishing what happened to you in any way, I think that it's an example of the power of good stories. You know, you had this interaction at a dark moment in your life with Captive Pursuits, this one particular episode, and then you paid that forward and put it out into the ether through your podcasting. And you, in a way, became a captive pursuit for somebody else.
Wow.
And so you, my man, are the channel that saved another life, you know, and it's an example of paying it forward and bringing goodness into the world, which to me is what Star Trek is all about. Making the future, that optimistic future that we want to have, where people feel like there's hope at the end of the tunnel, that things are going to get better, you know, maybe not in the short term, but in the long term. And that we can get to a place of betterment for all of us. And so I think Captive Pursuit is in a Deep Space Nine episode. I think you're Captive Pursuit, quote unquote, in that you have helped someone by sharing that story. And maybe there's somebody who at some point listens to this and is in a dark point in their life and they decide to make a change. And I don't mean to speak for you, but I'm sure I do when I say that you, me, and Bill, and you know all the other Star Trek fandom, if you're listening to this and you're part of Star Trek fandom, we love you, man. Mm-hmm. We love you, lady. And if you believe in an optimistic version of the future, we are your people. Don't feel alone. Reach out on Facebook, on Twitter, to the person who's at the comic book shop or someone near you. And let's do it together and let's build a positive future where we all feel fulfilled. I think that that's possible. And I think that I'm going on a rant here, but I think that you are the first person who I think has actually become a Star Trek episode incarnate to another person.
Well, I don't really know what to say other than that means a lot. And I thank you very much. I think you hit the nail right on the head, man. Complete strangers. We may be complete strangers if we meet up with some, you know, whomever in Vegas, but we're not strangers because we share the same love, and that's Star Trek. And it's a great feeling to be able to. I'll be the first person to admit I'm not the most comfortable meeting new people, except when it's Star Trek people. And people who know me may say that's not true, Dan. You get along with everybody. No, it's sometimes very difficult for me to interact with people that I've never met before, and because I don't know what to say sometimes. But if it's Star Trek people, because we have that common thing that we love so much, it's so great. I remember the first time I went to Vegas with Bill a few years ago. It was the best first trip to a Vegas convention you could ever imagine because I felt at home. I felt like it was where I belonged. And if my words can help people, I'll shout it from the rooftops as much as I need to. But I really appreciate what you said, man. It meant a lot.
No, it's true, man. It really is. But I have to say, I have to bring up a Star Trek episode of my own selection at this point because you brought up the convention and talking about Star Trek people. The TNG episode Masks for some people is a downer. Some people don't like it. Some people really like it. But I think there's a message in that episode that speaks to me, which is that as we go through our lives, we put on different kinds of masks when we're dealing with different kinds of people. I have a position at a corporate America type company, very professional work environment, and I have people working for me, and I deal with executives in a firm, and I'm a certain way when I'm with them, and I have a certain way of being and a certain way of acting and a certain way of existing. I come home, I deal with my wonderful spouse, who is the most amazing woman in the world, and someone that I am forever grateful that I conned into marrying me. She still hasn't figured it out yet, which is hilarious. But I feel like I'm playing a role in a way. And I'm not saying I'm not genuine, I am, but I constantly filter everything through the lens of being the husband. When I'm talking to my kid, who's still a kid, I am being a dad. And when I go to the convention, I feel like it's the one time where I'm not wearing any masks. Like it is a full-on John experience that even people who know me profoundly well in real life never really get, because we go to the convention and I can live the fullest expression of this fandom, which means so much to me that I can't experience in other venues. And it's really powerful for me. And I think that that's something you just touched on there with your expression about going to the conventions. I think it really matters to people.
Well, see, now, as we talked about before, I'm going to watch Masks again. And I'll be honest, on See It or Skip It TNG Season 7, Bill and I could not skip this one enough. But the next time I watch it, because now I am going to watch it again based on what you just said, man, because I'm going to be able to look at it through a different lens and get a better appreciation for it. So thumbs up to you. Don't know if it'll be changing to a See It, but I'm going to try. How's that?
Well, let's put it this way. I remember reading a book, or I don't remember I honestly don't remember if it was a book or a magazine article or a web article or whatever it was, but it was about Timothy Leary. And, I'm not big into any kind of illicit drugs, but he was talking about LSD. And one of the things he talked about LSD as far as the trip that you would have, and this is quoting Timothy Leary, he talked about set and setting. Set meaning like the things that are in you as you have the experience, and setting is the people around you. Mm-hmm. And I actually took a very profound life lesson from that like the things that are in you and the people around you at any given moment, 1 + 1 equals who knows. Even if you have a positive mood about yourself and you're with negative people, well, then you can end up having a negative experience, right? And forget, what Timothy Leary's talking about. I mean, that could be going to the ball game, right? You love a team, you're surrounded by people who hate the team, you're not going to have the best experience because you're surrounded by haters. If you have a love of Star Trek, you go to the Star Trek convention, you have a love for it, you're surrounded by people who love it, it's 1 + 1 equals 100. And that's, I think, something that is ineffable about that experience. I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe I'm over talking it. I don't know. And I get that some people go to these things and they don't have the same experience too, which can be a letdown, right? They're listening to what I say. Maybe they go to the convention. They're like, yeah, I didn't have that experience at all. I don't know what this guy John's talking about. He's a crazy person, which is, probably 99% likely anyway. But I do think there is something special about this fandom that causes those things to happen. And that's one of the reasons I do this show, is because I honestly don't know, and I'm trying to figure it out, what's so powerful about it. I mean, you've talked about the fact that it's changed your life. You've talked about the fact that, it gave you something that you were lacking at a critical moment in your life. And I think that that's something that is a broader message for all of us to take from this story. So thank you for sharing that, Dan. I don't know what else to say, except maybe we should talk about some more episodes, unless you have some additional thoughts to share with us about Captive Pursuit.
No, I think that's a great idea. One other thing that I would add is it was 2 years ago this August that, well, it was before that. I got it done in August, but I finally decided that I wanted to show my appreciation for what Deep Space Nine and Captive Pursuit did for me. So as a person who swore earlier in his life that he would never, ever get a tattoo, I decided to get one based on the amazing tattoo that Bill got done on his arm. So in Vegas a couple of years ago, Sausage, who used to be on one of the tattoo shows, the name is escaping me right now. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it, Ink Wars or something like that, did an amazing job on my arm, which shows my celebration of Deep Space Nine, which is basically a large Deep Space Nine Delta with the wormhole in the center of the Delta. And above the Delta,
nice,
in all its glory, is the USS Defiant. It is a one-of-a-kind. I wear it proudly on my arm to show my love for Deep Space Nine and my thanks for Captive Pursuit for saving me. So it's part of me forever, both inward and outward, I guess I should say.
Dan, I'm looking at this list that the M5 has prepared, and I have to admit I'm at a crossroads, because both episodes that the M5 is telling me we should talk about are basically the same. They begin in the frozen tundra, where we're digging some stuff out of the ice, and they both have to do with kooky time travel craziness. So please explain yourself when you tell me about Regeneration from Enterprise and Voyager Timeless.
Yes, it's it's funny. I never really put that together that they were both icy. Well,
They both
Timeless,
start in the frozen tundra
yeah,
and digging stuff out of the ice.
absolutely. Timeless has a direct tie-in to what happened with me with Captive Pursuit, which is why it's so important. Yes, it's time travel. It's got some wackiness to it. Harry's kind of a jerk through most of the episode, but he rode 15 years with this tremendous amount of guilt for what happened to Voyager and all of his friends dying. And when I said that what happened to me in the late 90s, I lived with for 15 years of tremendous guilt for what happened. Now, I will be honest. I'm not going to get into what happened, but I'm going to say in the grand scheme of things, looking back at it now, it wasn't I didn't kill anybody. I didn't, let loose anthrax on an office or anything like that. But to me, it was a devastating moment in my life. And what I did was completely wrong and against everything that I was brought up to believe in. So I had 15 years worth of guilt that I lived with on a daily basis. And I'm not exaggerating when I say daily basis. Even after I met my wife and we got married and we have a great life, not a day went by or has gone by for the most part without thinking about what happened. When Bill and I talked about it on Trek Geeks, he said, dude, you got to let yourself, live a little and not think about it every single day. And I will be honest and say that it has not been every day, but it does come up in my mind all the time. So to me, Timeless is very important because I know what Harry's going through. I don't have a reset button. He had a reset button, which is why this episode to me is important. And I can see that pain in his face for what's going on. And his is on a much grander scale than mine. So that guilt that I had felt is actually not there anymore because I've had reconciliation with the people that were involved and I've gotten the forgiveness and all that, which is great. But it still is a very important part of my life that I don't want to let go, so to speak, because I feel that I should always have that little piece of guilt with me. That make sense?
No, it makes total sense because it helps you understand what to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remembered when I was in college, someone gave me a book which it was one of these joke books. I mean, it wasn't like a serious book that you read and try to get life lessons from, but I actually did take a life lesson from it, and it was called "The Leadership Secrets of Attila the Hun," and it's a joke book. It's not meant to be a serious book, but in the book, one of the jokes is Attila says every Hun has value, even if only to serve as a bad example to other Huns. And it's like a stupid thing, right? Yeah. But this is one of these things that I remember. Let me see. I remember I went to a bunch of colleges, and I remember the college I was in when I got that book, and that might have been like 1989. And I still remember that line verbatim out of the book. And I think that is not just true for people, but it's also true for those experiences. And so the things that happen to us and the things that happen to you and that regret that you have, and I don't know if that's the right word, feel free to substitute the emotion of your choice. It's not my spot to speak for you in that. But it tells you what to avoid. When we stick our hand as a young kid on the hot stove accidentally and we go, ow, and we get a burn, that burn is not just a physical wound, but it's also a reminder of, hey, let's avoid this in the future.
Right.
And so it helps us think about how to get better in the future. Yeah. And, I think that's part of what we've been talking about here with these Star Trek episodes. I mean, we talked about Inner Light and how Picard's experience of that simulated family gave him an understanding of how to be better as a captain and how to be better as a human that he didn't have before. And it might be true for you that this experience that you had was your putting your hand on the stove, and it's not pleasant. You wouldn't recommend it to anybody else. But the fact that you had that experience, it's serving as an example for what you want to avoid and maybe helping you choose better in the future, which is, not something that you want to be grateful for, but something that, you can appreciate. And I can appreciate just as someone who's talking you through this. I think it's, a good life lesson, and I'm sorry that you had to have it, but it certainly seems like something that has set you on a better path.
Very well put. I think it's made me a better person. And as I have always said, when you talk about that hot stove and you don't do it again, I would go through everything 100 times over again, knowing that Susan was going to be that light at the end of the tunnel. Susan's my wife. So
I figured that out. Dan.
it all worked out. And sometimes you have to go through the worst of times for the best of times. Little Star Trek 2 reference there a little bit. But yeah, it's something that happened, and I'm a better person for it. And I'm just glad to be here, man.
She's a lucky lady, and I think we're lucky as fans to have you and Bill, presenting the amazing Trek Geeks to us, and the joy that you guys have when you do the show. I mean, it's infectious, and I don't think that I don't think that anyone who listens isn't enlightened by it. And enlightened has a double meaning. Not only are they learning things about Star Trek, but their life is just getting a little bit more joyful every time they hear you guys.
Thank you.
So. No, you're welcome, and I mean it. Tell me about regeneration, though, because I feel like we talked a little bit about Timeless, but I don't feel like we really plumbed regeneration. So I want to understand this, and let me just give a little bit of background for those who, all these episodes might be running together. So we had the Borg in TNG. They were scary as hell. We had First Contact, where they introduced the Borg Queen. Were the Borg even in Deep Space Nine? I don't think they were.
No, unfortunately not. No.
Yeah, so there's no Borg in Deep Space Nine. Then we had Voyager, which took the Borg in a whole nother direction. And, you can talk about that if you want. I'll leave that to you. But then after that, we come to Enterprise, where they had a Borg prequel / sequel. Yes. I'll just leave it there. So tell me why this episode is meaningful to you.
Well, you hit the nail right on the head. The Borg were the most threatening, scary, evil threat the Federation had ever faced in Best of Both Worlds and TNG. And then First Contact, oh my God, First Contact, they were just, better special effects, and they just looked more menacing, and they had this technology and time travel and this, that, and the other thing. And then Voyager happened. And I respect Voyager. I've grown to love it more that I've watched it again, thanks to the TV channel Heroes and Icons. However, they took the fiercest enemy the Federation has ever faced and turned them into a laughing stock. I don't like what they did with the Borg on Voyager.
Explain that.
They wussified the collective to the nth degree. The Borg would never have done the things. The Borg from TNG would never have done the things that they did in Voyager, like, make a treaty.
Be specific.
With
Give examples.
Janeway, and allow them to go through the passage without assimilating. I don't think that the Borg themselves in TNG would have had any problem assimilating Voyager at the beginning when the Borgs first started showing up on Voyager. I just think that they made them kind of weak. A lot of it was far-fetched. The space transwarp hubs, I just absolutely despise to a degree that I can't even tell you. It's like there's little tunnels in space, but it's subspace, but they have little metal barriers that you can shoot with torpedoes. I did not like what they did with the Borg and Voyager, and it was, I don't want to say I was mad about it. It was disappointing what they did. Now, there were some aspects that were good. I'm not going to completely trash them, but I just don't think as a whole what the Borg became in Voyager was a positive change. And then regeneration came on Enterprise. And I say this is one of the most meaningful ones. Not personally, it means so much like Captive Pursuit, Voyage, Timeless, or The Inner Light, but as a Star Trek fan, it's meaningful because of what this episode did. We had a scene in First Contact where that Borg sphere is destroyed by the Enterprise E, and that's it. We don't think about it again. But it somehow, the wreckage of that sphere landed on Earth, and nobody caught it because back in 2063, nobody saw it until Enterprise time. And the whole idea of the Borg was reintroduced in Enterprise. And they were able to make this continuity work, in my mind, perfectly. Now, there are some aspects of regeneration that I'm not overly thrilled with. I don't like the way the ship looked, but I love the way that the Borg acted. They ignored people that weren't a threat, just like the original Borg would. And at the end, when you find out that they sent a signal towards the Delta Quadrant, and the amount of time that it took was just about the exact amount of time before we encountered them in TNG, I thought was a perfect bookend to the whole Borg story, even though the bookend took place in the past because it hadn't happened yet, even though we already saw it. My mind is already starting to melt, so I'm going to leave it at that.
So Deep Space Nine was your favorite series. Which one comes second?
I think I would have to go with the original series as second, followed by, TNG is just so crucial to fandom, and there's so much greatness in it that I'd have to put it that third, followed by Enterprise, and then Voyager. I'll tell you what, Discovery, I haven't even thought about where I'm going to put Discovery, but it's right up there. It's right up in the I love Discovery. I thought what they have done so far has been fantastic. I don't think I want to rank it yet until we have at least one more season under our belt, but I think the storytelling and the acting on that show has been great. So yeah, DS9, TOS, TNG, Enterprise, Voyager. I think that's how I'd go.
We haven't actually talked about Discovery, and I'm glad you brought it up, Dan, because there's something you mentioned almost right at the beginning of this episode that I want to go back to. You had talked right at the beginning of the episode about growing up watching these reruns. And you talked about how family members, in a lot of cases for people had introduced people to Star Trek. I'm going to just put a proposition out there. And again, this isn't my personal view. I'm not saying what I believe, but I'm putting out a provocation for you to react to. Star Trek Discovery will be far less important to informing the relevance of Star Trek as a cultural phenomenon because it's behind a paywall and it is not discoverable, mad pun, because it's on a streaming service. And so it is already hobbled before it even begins as a show.
I don't know if I can agree with that 100%. I think I agree. It is a paid service, and I totally understand where CBS is going with what they decided to do. It's the way of the future. I think there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be that way down the road. But at the same time, if it was going to be handicapped, I think the fact that you can take something like this show and binge watch an entire season in 2 days instead of 4 months or longer doesn't give you the appreciation and the ability to think about what just took place in a single episode because you're watching them one at a time and you're not going to have that pause to think about what's going on. I think that eventually there'll be ways where this can be viewed. I mean, for example, Netflix is a paid service also, and overseas they use Netflix as that medium to watch Discovery. But I think that it's more handicapped in that sense than by the paywall. I'm not one that looks at the paywall with any real negativity, at least not yet. I haven't thought that way.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, for my own thoughts, I don't worry about the paywall too much for myself, but I mean, there's people out there that I know, and we both know for a fact that yes, even $6 a month for some people is a serious financial commitment, right? And we know that. Mm-hmm. And we have to respect that.
I do agree with that. I do respect it very much. I also think that there can be other ways for new fandom to be brought in, possibly for those people who don't have that $6 a month. We talked about it a little while ago. Fans, friends. I know that a lot of people out in LA get together every week when Discovery was on, and they'd have like a party of 20 people watching it. There's always ways to do it, but I understand what you're saying, and I think the challenge here for CBS is they do have this paywall, but they do want to bring new fans in. You can't bring new fans in until they can see something. I think that's why an idea of maybe the free first month or something like that might help to do it. It's one of those debates that you can agree with and disagree with and see both points. But like I said, I think the biggest handicap in my mind is the idea that people can just binge watch this stuff with today's technology, and it doesn't give them the ability to really digest what's going on as much as with TNG did. And that, oh my God, 4 months between Riker saying Mr. Worf fire on the Borg cube before we knew what was going to happen to Captain Picard.
I'd agree with you. It's just a very different thing when the episodes are like coming out of the eyedropper, you know, and you just get this little bit and then you have to pause and you know, it's a very different thing. I mean, I had that experience and I've talked to Bill about this. I'm a big fan of Babylon 5 and I talked to him and I said, you have to watch this. And I realized as I was saying it that he'll never have the same experience that I did because I had to wait like 8 months between like these episode breaks and like the fans were going berserk and, you know, it was just, but when you binge it, it's just a very different experience.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we've talked about that, you know, in this episode between us of Trek Profiles. So Dan, I want to pivot now, and I actually want to ask you this question, which is we've talked about how you express your fandom. We've talked about things you collect, how you watch the shows, your podcasting that you do. We've talked about what you think are the best episodes and what you think are meaningful episodes to you. You've shared some very powerful stories. I guess the question now is, what does Star Trek mean to you in your life as we sit here in 2018 and record this? I mean, why continue to watch these episodes that you've already seen? What's it all mean, my man?
Well, it's a great question, and every time you ask this question to your guests, I'm very interested to hear their answer because it's an easy question, but it's a very difficult question at the same time. I mean, when you get right down to it, Star Trek's as William Shatner said on Saturday Night Live, it's just a TV show, but it's lasted over half a century. It's practically the universe that my world revolves around. And it was that escape that I needed when I was growing up, going through those quirky times, teenage years. You're not exactly sure what life's all about. And I wasn't a sports guy. And this is where I went to escape. But more importantly, when I went through my tough time back in 1999 and 2000, it was what I needed to survive, literally. So to me, it means everything, John. Star Trek means everything to me, literally. Like I said, everything revolves around it. Not a day goes by that it's not part of my life in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's planning the podcast with Bill or researching, reading a book, bringing up a topic about Star Trek with my wife. We're building our dream house right now, and my podcast studio is going to be all Star Trek decorated. So talking about things that I want to buy, everything happens. And one of the things that I always find interesting is whenever we're not watching Star Trek, but watching something else, I'm always pointing out people on TV, oh, they were in this episode of Star Trek and they were this character or they were this alien. And it drives people crazy. But at the same time, if I don't do it, they're like, why aren't you telling us who is in Star Trek? So it's just always there. It brings me joy. And other than my wife and my family, it's the thing that brings me the most happiness in my life is this phenomenon called Star Trek.
I think there's no better point to move this episode into the final phase. And I have to say that because, well, no, it's true, because the M5 is signaling me as we speak, Dan. The M5 has a direct cranial implant in my skull.
Whoa. And
the M5 is signaling me that it's time for the Kobayashi Maru.
Oh, yes. I can't wait. I've been waiting for this all night.
It is a challenging and difficult test, cunningly prepared by the M5, not by me, by the M5. Should you not only survive the test, but pass it as well, the M5 will award you an honorary Star Trek title. Are you ready, Dan?
I just need to get my Apple like Kirk had in the 2009 reboot. Here we go. Okay, I'm ready.
M5, load the Kobayashi Maru simulator and prepare to record Dan's responses.
M5 working. Simulation loaded.
Question 1. Which is the snazzier uniform? The Discovery Season 1 blue sets or the Star Trek movie Monster Maroons?
Monster Maroons.
Question 2. Which is the better episode of the animated series? Yesteryear or More Tribbles, More Trouble?
Yesteryear.
Question 3. Pick a Klingon to fight hand-to-hand. Kang, Koloth, or Kor?
Kor.
Question 4. Human play Domjot or Bajoran play Springball?
Domjot, human.
Question 5. Dan, you're a single man in the Star Trek future. You need a date, so you join the 24th century version of Tinder. You get 2 matches, and you have to pick one. who will enjoy a lovely evening of Tullaberry wine and dancing with Dan? Is it Kai Wynn or the Board Queen?
Oh, God. Board Queen.
Simulation complete. M5, please compute the results and tell us if Dan has passed the Kobayashi Maru. Dan, I am pleased to tell you that the M5 has calculated that you have passed the Kobayashi Maru simulation. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. I know, right?
Fantastic.
Okay. And now, the M5, who has analyzed your answers, will award you an honorary Star Trek title on behalf of our podcast. M5, what title shall we award our guest?
Dan is awarded the title of Chief Busboy for 10 Forward on the USS Odyssey.
So there you go.
I've always wanted to be on the Odyssey. The Odyssey. It is quite audacious, the Odyssey, and I am the busboy, and I am forever humble. Thank you, John.
Dan, please tell people how they can get in touch with you.
Absolutely. You'll find me usually over on Twitter at TrekGeekDan. You can also find me at TrekGeeks or at Discovering Trek. And you can email me at dan@trekgeeks.com. Also over on Facebook, we have our Trek Geeks and Discovering Trek pages. And also our world famous and very fun Camp Kittimer, which is facebook.com/groups/Camp Kittimer.
Dan, thank you so much for being a part of the Trek Profiles podcast. I really appreciate it.
It is certainly my pleasure, John. I had a fantastic time. Congratulations on such a successful podcast. I wish you many more fun-filled episodes, and I can't wait to hang with you in Vegas in just a few short weeks, man.
Here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast, and before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your helpful feedback, flames, or odes to the might of the M5 at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at Trek Profiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or may be sucked into the maw of the Doomsday Machine. This week, I leave you with a quote from Benny Russell, who said in the episode Far Beyond the Stars, quote, "Wishing never changed a damn thing." Unquote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.